Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Detour, and we are actually live for the first time in a couple of weeks. It's a different feeling, a lot more pressure. I'm your host, Dan Jones, joined as always by four-time national road champion Johnny Trevorrow, and a man who is just a premier commentator, but he's also really good with questions. So that's why I've brought him on tonight, because we really wanted to lift the bar, and that is, of course, Matty Keenan. Start with you, Keeno. You must be pretty excited about our guest, given that he had a bit of an impact with his questions and answers from the Tour this year.
His interview at the end of the Tour de France with Allan Peiper was one of the best that you've ever seen. And Dan, as you know, I've told you a few times, when I started in cycling, one of the things that I most looked forward to was reading the articles by Allan Peiper in Bicycling in Australia, seeing the interviews of him on SBS, because every time he spoke or every time he wrote, you learnt something. And actually, earlier this week, I was up in Noosa with Matt Wilson. Matt Wilson rode the Tour de France twice. He won Australian road title and was a real workhorse as a team leader and a super domestique at the Mitchelton Scott team when it started as Green Edge. And he told the story from 1993 when he went to a training camp with Victorian cyclists up in Ararat, and Allan Peiper went there. I think he would have been in the back of the camper van driven by Ken Trowell. And Allan spoke about his journey in cycling and said, if everything goes right, you're dedicated, you follow your passion, maybe one of you guys will become a professional cyclist. And one did from that room. It was Matt Wilson. And he's told the story multiple times about that influence that Allan had on him back in 1993.
Yeah, it's fantastic. There's going to be so many great stories that we're going to embark on throughout the show. And if you've obviously known Allan for quite some time, and geez, Just Rewards this year being crowned the number one sports director. I didn't even know there was like an awards ceremony or whatever, but now that Allan's won it, it's bloody global news.
As it should be. Yes, I remember watching Al when he was a junior coming up in Australia, and then I was racing over in Belgium when he was going really well as a young junior in Belgium, and used to have a yap to him at the races, and I've followed his career. He's been an absolute superstar, and we all know what happened this year at the Tour de France. So I'm really looking forward to having a catch up with him and see where he is today.
Well, he's there, ready to go. Let's not waste any more time. It's Allan Peiper. Allan, thanks for joining the Detour again, mate. How are you feeling now that you're an award winner? You're the number one sports director on the planet. Has it gone to your head?
Yeah, really gone to my head, mate. Yeah, and as they say, you're only as good as your last victory. So, it pales pretty fast. It's great.
Allan, take us back to the 17-year-old that first landed in Belgium. And if that 17-year-old got to meet the sports director of the year, what would have you thought?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I suppose probably would have been in awe, actually, and probably wouldn't have said much, unfortunately. I always think that afterwards. I should have asked him a few questions. But then it's too late, isn't it? Yeah.
So what about if you could get in the DeLorean and go back and tell that 17-year-old, stick to the path, trust yourself, one day you'll be the sports director of the year?
Yeah, it's you've got to follow your dreams, don't you? Can't be right for everybody, but yeah, if you just keep following the pathway, then things unfold, don't they? And fortunately, I've had a wonderful pathway. You know, John saw me way back then in Belgium when I just got here as a 17-year-old, and we've been in touch since. You know, so it's been a long path to get here, but yeah, I've been fortunate in my life. I've had a lot of great opportunities that I've taken.
When you got announced as having won the award, did you take some time just on your own to reflect on that journey, because it has been enormous?
I think, Matt, the reflection I did was just after the time trial in the Tour de France. I got down on my haunches next to the car and had a super big cry and thought about the kid who was 17 and all the stuff that's gone on, all the obstacles I've had to get over to get to that point of winning that TT, that Tour de France. And I think being sports director of the year is run off from that. You know, of course it's a great acknowledgement. I got a message from Patrick Lefevre at 10:30 that night congratulating me, and he'd won the award for the last 3 years, rightly so. But just, to be in amongst those guys who've, shaped Belgian cycling is pretty incredible.
How was the ceremony? Is it like the Oscars? Did they have like the top 4 countdown and then big drum roll, or was it just you've won it and then the media starts from that?
Well, normally, Dan, there's a big gala night. It was in the casino in Knocker or in another big venue where everyone comes, dressed to the nines, and sit down dinner and, roll out show. But this year, because of COVID, there was nothing. Unfortunately, I got to go to Antwerp to a studio and do an interview for television and a couple of interviews for the newspaper. And basically that was it, because there was nothing else could happen. They did do a short piece on the television that night, but more or less they couldn't do anything. But what did change this year is they gave all the winners, for the under-23 winner, the director of the year, the women's winner, and the men's winner, they gave them one full day sort of in the newspaper by themselves without the other winners. So I had Tuesday the 15th in Last the News. I had 2 pages, my photo on the front page, my photo on the front page of the Sport, 2 pages in the Sport, and I had a couple of minutes on television in the 7 o'clock news and 1 o'clock news in the afternoon. So that was sort of my day, and 2 days later it was Wout van Aert who got his day. So it sort of really made it. It made it bigger than it was before, I think, because of COVID and because of the way it went around. It reached much more public.
Good timing. I'm normally of the view, Allan, as a commentator, never read the comment section. But I imagine this would have been one where it would have been heartwarming for you to read the comment section.
I don't really go back and read comments too much, although there were a couple that I...
Tell the truth, Allan.
I did see Robbie McEwen's, and that was enough for me, to know that Robbie spoke with those words of me so highly was pretty fantastic. And there was a couple of other personal ones that I got, that were quite touching and was fantastic. A couple of old riders that I'd had in the team. One of them's a Belgian kid called Het Dox, and he was with HTC. Back in 2010, I think. He sent me a message just about how I'd looked after him back then and how he was so pleased that I got the award. And I think that was something that was really nice as well, to get that back from a young kid who wasn't a great bike rider but felt that I'd looked after him.
I think because you had such an impact on so many people's lives, Allan, and you do have such a big heart, and we've seen that you're very open in the conversations you had with us, particularly the morning of the final day of the Tour de France. Looking back now, how proud are you of these connections that you've been able to develop over the journey?
Oh, immensely proud of the people I've met and the communications I've been able to have with people. You don't want to blow smoke up your own rear end, but it's nice to be held in this sort of level of merit, with so many people around the world. In Australia, where I'm from, but especially here in Belgium, where it is the mecca of cycling, and even France, the other countries as well. I know so many people that have come across my path through the years. It's a nice telling story about your life.
On that influence that you've had, I'm sure you heard the story before that I spoke of Matt Wilson and the impact that you had on him by telling your story back in 1993. Can you remember that tour that you did around the countryside, regional towns in Australia?
Yeah, I do, Matt. It was the year after I stopped riding. I came back to Australia. I think I did 25 different clubs in Victoria, New South Wales and Tasmania. Just traveling around with a 4-wheel drive, got in touch with the club, said, hey, look, do you want me to come and do a talk? And it was a talk about motivation and dedication. I remember that. It was the first sort of talking that I was doing, and in front of a crowd, and sort of talking through the, what I wanted to talk about was, staying motivated, being dedicated, and then, maybe things come around. And I do remember that tour, and it comes up quite often. But that was another stepping stone to where I am now as well. And I was really pleased I did it. It seems a bit weird now, so many years later, 30 years later. But it was fun, and if I see the story of Matt Wilson, then it got across to one kid anyway.
I got across to more than one kid. I went to the one in Brunswick, and you didn't tell us that one of us in the room could make it as a pro. So that was my stumbling stone, Alan, not the lack of talent. It was because you said to Matt Wilson, somebody will make it. But it was a big influence, because for me, in my journey in cycling, I worked out that there's more than one way to skin a cat. Sure, I wasn't good enough to make it as a bike rider, but I looked for another way to make it in cycling. And your story tells that as well, because the journey that you went through was extraordinary.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. There were reasons for it, and I've sort of have this real Australian, angry as a cut snake mentality. I would say, you might say tenacious, but I think that other way was a better example.
Yeah.
But I think that's got me through a lot of the adversity that I've come up against, and I've had a lot of good people around me, Matt. People who have really supported me. Gerald George back in the Hawthorn Cycling Club, Ted Sanders, who looked after me, and Phil Anderson, back in the early days, Peter Brotherton, who gave me, ace advice and, on diet and how to look after myself, and contact with Gerald to the Paris Club where Phil Anderson went as well. I've had people near me all the time. They haven't carried me, they haven't done it for me, but I've had, really great support crew all the way through my life, people that I could turn to. And I think that's really an important aspect, getting good advice and taking it. Of course, you've got to do it yourself. There's nothing else. They can't do it for you, but having those people that can show you the signposts is important.
There's a great saying that I really like: you are the company you keep. So people who smoke generally hang out with other people who smoke, and people who are idiots normally hang out with people who are idiots.
So look at the detour.
So we're going to have to change our circle of friends here, Alan. In that regard, what are some of your criteria in terms of the people that you surround yourself with? What do you look for?
I think I look for people who are genuine and open. I think I pride myself on not judging people for how they look or how they even talk. If they seem genuine to me, then that's a good starting point. And I have a tough job keeping up with people around the world. Messages and calls, but I really do like that diversity of friends that I have, and surrounding yourself with people who maybe not even genuine is more important, but maybe people that do the right thing. Doing the right thing. I think those are the people to surround yourself with. Because you usually end up in the right place when you surround yourself with people that do the right thing.
On that topic, sorry to dominate the questions, guys.
I'll get one in you. I've been trying.
You can send it via Twitter if you like, John. There's a famous American basketball coach, Eugenie Guriami, I think his name is. He coaches women's college teams. And he says when it comes to recruitment, he knows that everybody that makes it to that phase of recruitment, they've got good skills. But what he looks for is their attitude. So he's watching them when they're on the bench, when they're not in the game, how they're responding to a teammate playing well or not playing well, and those sorts of things. How much do you spend looking at the character of the riders that you recruit beyond what their raw numbers are and their results have been in the junior categories?
Well, it is quite difficult to get a hold on, the character of some kids. I remember there are kids that have stuck out in my mind that have come across my path over the years that I've been trying to scout, who you felt had a and I'll give one example, Mark Hirschi, who rode so well in the Tour de France this year. 4 or 5 years ago, I drove to Switzerland, met with him and his manager and his trainer, and talked him into coming to BMC development team. Unfortunately, that folded the year later, and he went to Sunweb development team and then turned pro for Sunweb. But in that meeting, this was a young man who was like 17 years old, who had so much depth in his confidence of himself, not a cockiness, but a real sureness that you could sort of say, wow, this kid's going to go a long way. And I think, those are the traits you can sort of pick out from a meeting. Of course, you're listening to people and what they say about how a kid acts and reacts as well. Although I feel sometimes, when we listen to other people's opinions of people, that leads us off on a garden path. We need to make our own decisions about how people are, because you can get a wrong opinion that will give you a wrong idea about somebody. But I think, I remember, in next to the Hilton Hotel in Adelaide, meeting the two Scotsman boys one year, and another year I met Rowan Dennis, the same place. And, last year I met Luke Plapp, and all these kids leave an impression. Miles was really friendly, and his brother was very withheld, sort of. Now I was curious about his character, that withheldness, so, but, getting it right into a team environment where they have to be helpers or they have to fit into a different environment. That's hard to judge beforehand before they turn pro.
Yeah.
It's your turn now, John.
Oh, get one in.
It's
It's interesting you're saying that. It's like when the first time I met Caleb Ewan, he went really well on the Bay Crits as about 17-year-old. But sitting down with him later on, you just knew he was going to make it. It's not a cockiness, it's just a self-assuredness. We knew how quick he was, but you could tell. But what I was going to say, you're talking about some of the people who helped you on your path, Al, and you mentioned Peter Brotherton. And I just have got the fondest memories of Peter. He was just such a legend. Like, you could not meet a nicer bloke. And his knowledge was just so deep. He didn't bother going too long with me because he knew I wasn't really going on that path or listening to what he was saying. But his knowledge of everything, like of food, of training, and his son, David, was just a legend, one of the nicest blokes you'd ever meet as well. But he must have been great for you and to help you on your setting your path for especially on the nutrition side of things.
Yeah, well, I went back to Australia when I was 19 from Belgium. The third time I'd been sick with hepatitis and spent a couple of weeks in hospital over there in Fairfield. Infectious diseases, and they loaded me up with antibiotics for 6 months, which sort of wrecked my intestinal tract. And I then met Peter, who got me down to his house to sort of teach me a little bit about food. And I ended up staying there for a year, and he got me back to full health. I was riding to work and working with the brickies and riding home. Him and his wife would get up with me at 5:30 or 6 in the morning. Peter would make me breakfast. Pam would make me lunch. If I think about the sacrifice those people made for me, it was pretty crazy as well. But, Pete was he was a hard man as well. I wasn't allowed to go out in the weekend, and I had to be in bed by 9. And, if I wasn't towing the line, then I couldn't stay there any longer. I remember once going to see Cole Chisel with Trowley, I think at the Southside 6 in Moorabbin. And we got home at 11:30, and, it was a moment that Pete nearly threw me out. Luckily, Pam, talked him into, giving me another shot, and I could stay. But he wasn't going to waste his time on someone who wasn't dedicated, who wasn't willing to go the full distance to achieve what he wanted. And I think that was an important lesson for me as well.
Yeah, but Pete, it's Barnesy. It's Chisel.
Yeah, glass on the shoes and everything.
Hey, one thing that twigged is when you said he gave you some really good lessons about food. Can you remember what the key things that he taught you in those early days about particularly diet?
Actually, Dan, there's something I thought about this week. If it's natural, it's good. And that's really the easy bottom baseline. Does it grow on a tree? Does it grow in the ground? Then it's good. And the further you get away from that, the further it is away from being good. Really simple. I mean, yeah. If you think about if you're drinking something or you're eating something, how close is it to the way it was grown or it came about in nature? And if it was an apple or a pear or a carrot, then they're pretty close to natural. But if you get to a bottle of Coke, how far is that from nature? Because it was originally water in the river. So If you apply that every time, you get pretty close. And of course, you can cut yourself some slack. But
well, you can squeeze a few grapes. That's okay.
Let them ferment for a while, John. You think?
Right, exactly.
So you drink your grapes, do you, John?
Hey, Al, can you set the scene for us? So when you say, you're 17 and you made the call that you're going to go to Belgium, and you didn't have much money, and there's these urban legends. We were talking with Jamie and Bernard a couple of weeks ago, and Bernard was saying, you've got to read Allan Peiper's book. I mean, there was a point there where you were, what was it, nicking cabbages out of the fields. How much did that resilience help you with your cycling journey, particularly in those early days?
Yeah, good question, Dan. Good question. I think there's a few different answers to that, and I'll try and be quick.
No, we got all night, mate. That's fine.
My old man had a problem with alcohol, and he was like to go to fisticuffs, which inevitably made me a really angry young man, and probably created the resilience in me, which I mentioned a few times in my book about this burning fire, So I think that was one thing. I had to survive, when I came over to Belgium. Unfortunately, I came with a guy, Brian Gillen, the Grub. Some of you might know him. I think John knows the Grub. And Grub was 21.
He doesn't like the Grub anymore. You're not allowed to call him the Grub anymore.
Yeah, he's Mr. Grub.
It's a worrying nickname.
And I was 17. So, I needed a piece of paper to say that I could race in Belgium, and I didn't have that. And after a month, I ran out of money. I really had nothing left. And I had met this guy, Staff Boner, who helped a lot of English-speaking guys over the years. He gave me a pair of tyres and took me to see the head commissaire from East Flanders, who got me this, permission to race. And the first race I rode, I punctured, so I actually had no tyres left. And Staff gave me a pair of tyres, put these tyres on, raced the next day, and he said that I could keep these tyres. And really, I had no money left. I had nothing. There was no internet. There was no calling up mum. There was no asking anybody. I was really on my own. So when I did race, I raced hard, and I raced for money. And Eddie Plankup, pulls the story out every time we meet or we're on television about, how we met. The first race was actually the first race I rode. It was in Anne in the Oldenade, where the Ronde of London finishes now. We crossed the line. He'd taken all the premies, wouldn't let me have one, and I spat at him after the finish line. And I don't know if that's true, but I can imagine in those days that was probably me.
I love it.
So that story about I was riding to a bike race in Belgium, probably 20 k's out of Ghent, a few weeks later, and with a guy, Mike Tanks. Tanksy, a very special guy, grew up in London. To tell you how special he was, he had a rub up with Gary Wiggins, so he climbed underneath the Herne Hill track through one of the ground level windows and sawed Wiggins's cross tube, not right through, but nearly through. So when he was sprinting the next time on the track, the frame broke.
Alan, you are the company you keep. You are the company you keep, Alan.
I don't know if Gary ever found out, but anyway, it was a good story. So Tanks and I were riding to this race, and we raced, and I don't know, I didn't do so good for some reason, had a puncture, whatever. We were riding home, and I saw this spinach growing on the side of the road, and I said I sort of felt it was a bit funny that it wasn't protected, no fence around it, wasn't in a greenhouse. And I said to Tanks, "What do you got for dinner?" And he said, "Well, actually, I've got nothing." I said, "Well, I've got some rice. And I've got some ketchup. Maybe we can pinch some of this spinach on the side of the road and we'll cook it up together." So he said, "Yeah, okay, let's do that." So we stopped on the side of the road, opened up our backpacks, stuffed some spinach in there, rode home, cooked it up, put ketchup on the top, and that was dinner. Later on, I found that this was just the top of these beets that they fed to the cows, So it was desperate times, it was really desperate times. The guys that I lived with, they'd walk down to the supermarket in the Veldstraat and spend an hour in the supermarket eating food, because they basically had nothing. But, I was also lucky that I met the Plancart family. They took me into their home. John came there once in a snowstorm and sat next to the fire with us as well. So he saw how they were living. There was no running water. There was no bathroom. It was just a pump in the kitchen and a wood fire to cook on. So, it was humble beginnings, but I think all of those steps sort of made me resilient. But going back to my dad, for a long time I was angry at my dad and angry at the world. But I can also reflect back now that I'm 60 years old and say, those things that happened to me in life, I used them in the best possible way. They made me who I am, and I'm not going to say I'm grateful to my old man for kicking my ass so many times, but, there was a part of that made me who I am. So more or less, I am grateful for my life and all of the experiences had that's made me the sum total,
We've got a few people writing questions in and comments. They're very similar themes. Legend. Thanks, Michelle. Noel Sands. Alan's a true Australian legend. Amazing to listen to this. Now, Pete Catty says, I'd love to know what Alan considers his guiding principles to be. Now, you just mentioned then channeling, what could be, obviously traumatic experiences into positive, things moving forward and how you use those. Is that been a key for you as well, particularly through really difficult moments?
Yeah, I think, Dan, when you're young, it's difficult to put anything into perspective. You don't have anything to reflect on. After my cycling career, I did quite a bit of belly gazing, trying to, get to the depths of some of those ghosts that I was still carrying around from my childhood. Now that I'm 60 years old, I've had a lot of time to reflect and look back, and I can see the patterns in my life and sometimes how they come around, which you only get with age anyway. But I think I think I said in an interview or an article a few months ago, which I think holds really true about anything in life, that life is just a series of phases, and as difficult as a phase might seem to be, that you never get out of it, that it'll never change, they always change. And if you can compartmentalize parts of your life that aren't going so good as a phase, it sort of gives you confidence and hope that, it won't be too much longer before you get out of it, or at least it changes to something else. I think that's probably the best thing that I can see out of my experience of life anyway.
Is that something you try and share with the riders? Because it can be really difficult for a 23, 24-year-old to see that.
If those things are pertinent, it's not something across the board I would tell these kids, but if it's pertinent to a certain rider, for sure I'd bring it across. It's like I don't try and shove food down their throat either. Because these days they know a lot more about food anyway. There's nutritionists in the team, but sometimes some of those life things that they pop up, and they are good things to say to the guys. They're young, and especially the neo pros. They're so I've had Pogacar and Phillips and Mikkel Bjerg in their first 2 years of being bike riders. The last couple of years, and some of the things that I've been able to bring across to them about life, and even Jasper Philipsen. I was with him the other day, and he'd forgotten a doctor's appointment. And I said, "Well, get your agenda set up on your phone, and your girlfriend can hook into that as well." I mean, stupid things like this, but that's sort of the advice of being the older gent with these young kids, isn't it?
What do you enjoy the most about the role as a sports director?
I think probably in a nutshell, is just being around the riders. Well, I really, really love just being around the young guys. Sometimes, I go in at breakfast time. I've been up 2 hours already, had breakfast with the staff, gone back to my room, adjusted my PowerPoint for the pre-race meeting, done my planning for the next day, answered some emails, and I'll go down when the riders are having their pre-race meal, and I'll sit there, and I won't barge into their conversation. I'll grab a coffee, sit on another table, sit close by. And, sometimes conversation pops up. And at those moments, you really get a good, you really get a good vibe from these kids, talking about gears or talking about bikes or equipment or just laughing about life or stupid things they do. I think that's really the fun thing. I'll give you a little example. 2 Down Under a couple of years ago, I was with BMC there, and we were sitting at the table. Rowan Dennis was at home that night in Adelaide, and we were having a conversation about Rowan. And I said, well, I think everyone's had a blue with Rowan at some point. I said, probably the only guy who hasn't is Miles Scottson. And Miles told me this story about how they were riding down the coast, doing the chain gang group, and they'd had an altercation, him and Rowan. They got each other in a headlock and they crashed through 40 k's an hour. And they ended up punching into each other on the ground. Just crazy stories. But, at that point, you're sitting there with the guys and they're laughing their heads off. I think that's really the great stuff,
That's awesome. That's a good thing about Rowan. Rowan doesn't discriminate. He treats everybody the same.
Hey, Allan,
I'll get one in, guys. I just wanted to say, when we spoke to you last, there was the euphoria of just about to win the Tour de France. You're about to, as you say, ride into Paris in your slippers, which is a wonderful analogy you put in earlier. And you won't be doing that next year. But anyway, what I was going to say is, the last part of the year, just how did it go for you? After the euphoria of winning the Tour, just how did that last part go?
Yeah, it was good. Obviously it was intense, even the racing after the Tour, because we came home, went straight to the Bink Bank Tour 8 days later. And then we went straight into all the one-day Northern Classics, which was, a lot of preparation and quite intense. But I think, as things slowed down, I remember a night in Bink Bank Tour, the second night, I just laid awake till midnight and went over all the steps of getting to the Tour de France, and I hadn't had time or space in my head to get to that point, and went to all the things that we did preparing for the Tour and how the Tour went itself and the things that I'd said and the things that others had said and how we got to that final day in Paris. And around me, of course, people even now are still congratulating me for the Tour de France. It's it's not blasé that I say that, because people recognizing things that have happened, you need to appreciate them while they're there. But it was a very busy end of the season. Like I said, culminating in all those final classics. Christophe finished third in the Ronde van Vlaanderen. And I just said to him yesterday, I said, you've got to knock off the Ronde van Vlaanderen before I finish my career. It's the one thing that doesn't end up on my palmarès. So he had a bit of a laugh about that. But it was a busy end of the season, but really nice to sort of take in a lot of the accolade, like this Christelle Fitz winning for the best director sportif, but also from, different instances, podcasts like this and articles and journalists. And by the way, I put a stop on any more interviews 2 weeks ago. So you're lucky you got me on here, Riffy.
You're a legend.
We feel honoured, mate. We feel honoured.
The power of on tomorrow. So how do you go about, how is the Tour going to be different next year for both Pogacar as the defending champion and the entire team having the defending champion?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. But I think, where we got away with sliding into Paris on our slippers this year, where we can't hide away from the fact that we've got the Tour de France winner in the team. We will need to go with a team that can defend his interests. I don't say we have to ride like Ineos or we have to ride like Jumbo Visma and ride on the front for 20 days with 7 riders. I don't see that has to be the way we race. I'm all about saving our strength for when we really need it. If we need to ride, we'll ride. If we don't need to ride, we don't ride. If we need to ask for help, we'll ask for help. From other teams for mutual interest. But I think what we really need to do is we need to have the team there that's ready to support Tadej if he has the yellow jersey, because we didn't have it till the last day this year, so we didn't have to defend. But if we have to defend, then we need to be really on the ball. We need to have the best guys there. We've done some really good transfers. We've got Rafael Maker coming over from Bora, which will be a good asset. We've got some young guys like Mikkel Bjerg, who was 3 times world champion with the youth ranks under 23 in the time trial. He's a really good helper and a really strong kid. Rode the Giro this year. The same as Brandon McNulty, a young American kid, rode the Giro, finished 15th this year in the Giro. I think if we get those 3 riders coming into our tour team, we can really bulk up what we've already got with guys like with Formolo and De La Cruz. There we're going to have some really good guys for the flat, but some really strong riders who can help us. The final thing is what we as a group don't really have a lot of experience in yet is riding like Jumbo Visma and Ineos or Sky, and getting that confidence that we can ride a 20k climb and bring our leader to the top, to the finish in the fastest possible fashion. And I think you can only get to practicing or training for that when you had the right squad, and you can do it in some other races. And I think that's what we really need to practice in races sort of moving up to the Tour, like Paris-Nice or Tirreno or the Dauphiné, where we need to get our guys on the front if it's needed, and that they can get the confidence that they can ride like Jumbo Visma or Ineos. It's not a given to do that, because every rider needs to know his own strengths, how long he can ride for, how much he can take, how he recovers day to day. So that's some things we need to learn as a group for the Tour de France 2021. But again, I feel confident that we've got some really good elements that have come into the team, or that have got older and are ready for a Grand Tour with Tadej that can support him even better. And I think we'll be ready when the time comes.
I just want to ask about 2 guys on your team this year, and I think the yellow jersey, we hear about it, adding an extra leg and more horsepower to the rider who's wearing it. I think it also transfers to the guys on the team. But I thought the rider who really rode out of his skin and was enormous for you this year was David De La Cruz. And the other guy that it could have been really expensive in terms of supporting was David Formolo, crashing so early, because he looked like he was on to be right there in the thick of the action to support Tadej.
Yeah. Formolo is definitely has a big motor, and the stage he won in the Dauphiné, which was nearly the same as the Tour de France stage to Col de la Loze, was really great to see from him. I think, like you said, David De La Cruz did a great job in the Tour. Unfortunately, he'd cracked his coccyx in the first day on the first stage. So I spent the next week or 10 days really struggling to deal with the pain of that and stay in the bike race. And I remember, having a conversation with him one day. He said, "I don't know how long I can hold this, Allan." And I said, "Well, look, David, take day by day. See how you get through. We expect nothing from you. You can stay last rider in the peloton the whole race. And if you see in 3 or 4 days it's not going, no one's going to say anything to you about going home. But if you stop today and you get home and next week you feel okay, you'll be upset with yourself. So let's take it day by day and see how it goes." And he did, and he came through. And he in that final week he was a real soldier. To get through that pain and come back to the level that he could help Tadej in the final stages. So with those 2 guys, we've definitely got two great soldiers. And we've got other good riders in the team, like Jan Pollank, who is Tadej's roommate, that we can, really form a strong group around Tadej.
Allan, how important is chemistry in a group? We're seeing all these amazing results, particularly from these young riders, but it's breaking the mold. The old mold was you've got this leader and, he's got all this respect in that. But, how important, particularly your group, was keeping that chemistry strong throughout those 3 weeks?
Oh, really, really important. I think the first thing, Dan, was that I'd realised after, a lot of years of trying to control everything around me, that I'd realised that I couldn't control everything. So I just wanted to focus on my role in the first car of being the first director, and my meetings, my PowerPoints, my communication with the riders, that I was relaxed and just thinking about the bike race, not thinking about all the other stuff that goes on, around a cycling team and with the cycling team, the logistics, the daily planning, all of that, I left to other people. So I could stay more relaxed. I think that was one thing, and more in my centre. I think the other thing was having Alexander Kristoff there wasn't really a necessity, because he's a sprinter, and when he's riding for himself, he rides for himself, and when he's not riding for himself, the race is too hard for him. So not really a great help for Tadej at a lot of times, but we did have an agreement. Look, when we get to the Tour, you can sprint, the first few stages, but the moment we see that Tadej's, got a chance, you're going to stop and you'll be the first man on the front, which he did. But what Alex really brought to the team was the fun element. He would get in the bus and he'd be playing, his Norwegian headbanger music on the bus before the team meeting, and he had some great songs that we'd call up every couple of days before or after the meeting, and Tadej would be laughing. Even on the most critical stages where we were discussing really winning or losing the Tour de France, they were still laughing in the bus. And I think that's the key element. That's the key element. I saw that in 2012 when we won the Giro with Ryder Hesjedal. We had Christian van der Velde there, and a really good dynamic where everyone was laughing and playing their music on the bus. I think that dynamic is hard to create, but there are elements that can come into play, but for creating the environment from that. And I think that's management keeping their cool and sticking to the plan and being as relaxed as they can, and having some elements within the team that can create a bit of fun. And I think we had the good dynamic this year.
On the flip side, are you very protective of that chemistry? Like, if you feel that there's someone or something coming into it that could potentially damage that, I mean, that can spread just as fast.
Yeah, well, look, we had Fabio Aru with us at the Tour. Fabio had been struggling with himself for a couple of years, not living up to his own expectations about how good he wanted to ride. We brought him to the Tour de France to give him the opportunity that he could do a good GC for himself. But I'd said to him, look, if you're not good after 4 or 5 days, then you need to switch over to the helper role, and you can do that fantastic. You can be famous for helping Tadej. But Fabio couldn't get his head around that, and the moment we told him he needed to go to be a helper, 20 k's later into the start of the stage, he stopped and got off and got into the car and went home. It's unfortunate, riders, battle against their own inner demons, but as a director sportif, it's difficult to know how to handle those situations and keep everybody positive around a negative element. Also, as a director, you have to be sort of half a psychologist. I really didn't know how to communicate with Formolo. He's an Italian who's quite exuberant with his energy, but I couldn't really read him and couldn't really make contact with him. But at a certain point, you open up to each other, you talk a little bit more, you come into some moments where things are difficult and you gain respect for each other, and, things go really good like they are. I think, creating that environment and holding that positive energy. We had a lot of pressure from management, from sponsors to be in the breakaway. And I had to, at a certain point, just put my foot down and say, we're not doing that. I'll take responsibility. We are not going in breakaways. And I said that to the riders in the meeting. Don't even think about it. We are not going in any breakaways. We're saving energy. We're doing what we need to do, and we're sticking to the plan. And I think, giving that confidence also helps with that whole atmosphere.
How hard is that, going back to the sponsors and saying, it's on me. I'm making this call. We're not doing that. We've got a guy who can win.
Well, there's a hierarchy above me. Obviously, Machin is the general manager. Mauro Giannetti is the CEO, and he answers to the sponsors back in UAE. And of course, it's not just saying we're not going to do that. It's just giving them the understanding of why we're not doing that, so that they can have confidence in what we're doing. And reasons for why things happen and why they don't happen. I think once they understand that, because our sponsors in UAE, they watch every bike race, they know everything that's happened. They read every article that's written. They see every podcast that happens. So
G'day, fellas. How are you?
Peter Sweat.
so they're really keen and mad fanatics on bikes, and they just want to see us in the action. But I think this year the Tour de France have given them a different idea about how bike races go.
So again, looking forward to next year's tour. Is COVID a blessing in disguise for Tadej? Because at this point, as the first winner from his country to win the tour, he'd have huge amount of commitments thrust upon him with functions and media commitments, sponsors and so on, but that will have been significantly reduced, which can let him focus on cycling.
Oh, 100%, Matt. Yeah, that's one thing I've thought of the last months. Tadej couldn't travel because of COVID, so he hasn't been able to do many expected gala dinners or invitations to different things, or even interviews or television. So it's sort of won him a little bit of peace this winter that he's been able to relax. He finished his season at Liège-Bastogne-Liège. He was meant to do Flanders the week after, but I even thought that was a little bit dangerous for the Tour de France winner, even before he won the Tour. But so he's had a good break and hadn't had too many commitments to do. So I think he's had a good winter to rejuvenate and get ready for next season.
Fantastic. Well, let him know I'm coming for him, because I was down on the Great Ocean Road last weekend, and he was obviously riding along that stretch of road for the Cadel Evans race in 2019. And he was at about 105 beats per minute up this hill going out of Lawn. And I saw that his name on the Strava list. So I was all in at about 180 beats per minute. I think I got him by about 3 seconds.
Look out today. Look out today. I was just going to say, Al, watching your career, from your junior days and whatever, you really, you were born to be a DS, I reckon. You're the consummate team man. There's some wonderful vision of you, jumping off your bike, giving Phil Anderson a wheel here, whatever. But you won over, more than 30 bike races yourself, top-level bike races. So, and you just about medalled in a world title. I'll still be kicking about that one. But I used to love reading. Matty touched on it earlier when you used to be writing for the different cycling magazines. I used to love reading your stuff. You actually had a real talent for writing, and you actually put the people in the race. I remember reading it was a Tour of Flanders story, and I had the hair sticking up the back of my neck. You actually had that ability to actually put me in the race. It was fantastic. You let that writing go. Have you ever thought about doing some more? I mean, you wrote a book, of course, but ever thought about getting back into that?
Well, there's been some talk about doing a sequel, a second part to the book of the 15, 16 years I've been a director sportif, and the riders that have crossed my path and the experiences I've had, which would be fun. But yeah, just need to find the time for it as well. I can see that it could be a good book, a second part, and probably the theme could be right as well. The full circle, having come back and being a director sportif, winning the Tour de France, having dealt with cancer for 4 or 5 years. And it would be a fitting climax, with the end being the Tour de France. But you just need the time, and I don't know if writing a book is quite in depth. It takes a lot of looking at yourself, and I've done a lot of that in my life. I don't know if I want to do it all again.
I want you to do it. First copy. And that I can remember that article too, John. I think you spoke about going to the house just down the road from the finish. It might have been Peter Post's house when you're writing for Panasonic to get changed.
Yeah, my house it was. My house.
Oh, your house.
I lived 300 metres from the finish. And Peter Post came to my house, yeah.
I remember that article. Yeah, I think I might still have that magazine in storage in my son's bedroom.
Oh, God. Good.
But there was one other story that I wanted to quickly talk about. Is there was a period that you weren't involved in the sport, Allan, from when you were racing, when you were out of it, but then you got back obviously into director of sportif roles. What happened in that period from when you finished your riding career to where you are now?
Yeah, I had the first couple of years, trying to stay in the sport, but the sport wasn't quite as international as it is now. And I did have an opportunity at the end of '91 to become director sportif with 711 Motorola, as it was then. But I wanted to ride one more year, and I'd missed my opportunity with Jim Okowitz. And all the teams I applied to wanted someone of their own nationality in the team, so I couldn't really get a job with the team as director sportif or PR or whatever. So I started doing training camps. I did those talks that Matt talked about earlier around Victoria. I did the same thing basically in Ireland and Scotland and England, and did camps in the US, and dabbled in a few things. Had a bit of television time, Commonwealth Bank Classic, Tour of Britain, Tour de France. But Phil and Paul basically had the English world sewn up back then. It wasn't quite that big, so I couldn't really graft a career out of that, or even a decent wage out of that. My first wife, Christina, had a fast food business from her family, made good money, and she said, "Look, come into the business with me, and we can make good money and have a good lifestyle," which we did. But
flipping burgers.
Flipping burgers and standing on bike races and festivals and football matches, and we earned good money, but it wasn't my calling, and it wasn't really what I wanted to do, and I felt a lot of years misplaced in what I did. But it made me humble, hearing some guys walk away from my stand and one particular time say hero to zero was an awakening, but also helped my resilience and was humbling in the fact that I knew that when I got back to be a director sportif, I knew that it could change any moment, and I could be just another guy going to work in a factory again. So I needed to be humble and appreciative of what I had. I did spend some years, doing belly gazing, a lot of meditation, went to India a couple of times, did a lot of therapy, looking into my own inner demons and trying to work out who I was and how I ticked and why I was who I was. So that 10 years that I was out of the sport, I think really gave me a lot of different tools to come back and be a director sportif. The value of money, because I had to work, for that money, doing the Gänse Feast with hamburgers. I remember one year I didn't sleep for 7 days, and the last three days I slept for 3 or 4 hours, So, having that resilience in another area when I came back to being a director sportif, I was so full of enthusiasm, so full of, wanting to be there for the riders. And I won't say help the riders, but be there for the riders and be there helping them on their way to achieving what they wanted to achieve. And I think that was my greatest tool, the things that I learned outside of the cycle sport, being humble, appreciating what I had, and being of service to them, have stood, as good values even to today and winning the Tour de France with Tadej.
Now, Alan, you're saying that flipping burgers wasn't your passion. Now, hamburgers is my passion. What is the key? What is the key to a good burger, mate?
I think you've got to get the onions right. I think the onions is the best thing. But what I really like is the American sauce. Mixing mayonnaise with ketchup. Get a good 50-50 mix of those, and get your bread roll, but take the sort of the soft part of the bread roll out so you can fill up the top and the bottom with American sauce. Then put the onions on the bottom, then your burger, and then your salad, your lettuce, your tomato. What I always like to do is a slice of cheese on the hamburger, the second side, where the second side is cooking, and then if you really want it, like a little fried egg on top of that, and it's a hamburger with a lot. You can do it veggie or you can do it meat, but for me, that's the max. The bread roll's got to go into the oven for a minute or so, just so it's warm, and the butter needs to melt before you put the American sauce and the onions on, and then you just got to squash it down a bit and be prepared not to let it go because it's going to fall everywhere otherwise.
John, just like those articles, entertaining and informative.
Look, you just mentioned the Gänse Feast. Now, a lot of people listening wouldn't know about the Gänse Feast. The Gänse Feast is a week-long beer festival, food festival in Ghent, most amazing city, Ghent. And you brought back a memory to me, Al, because I can remember when we were amateurs living over there in 73, when we raced a lot of the amateur tours that year. And in between races, we stayed in the Casamattenstraat in Ghent, famous street. And I remember on a Saturday, I'd get to the phone, ring Dad, tell him how I was going, and he said, "How'd you?" I said, "Oh yes, I'm racing in the Genser Feast at the moment, and I won the stage last night." And so Dad rings the Morwell Advertiser paper and tells them a big story about me winning a stage in the Genser Feast.
And you probably did win the stage.
I think I did. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been a bloody amazing chat as we expected. Matty, is there anything you want to ask to sort of wrap up the conversation with Al?
I don't want to ask anything. Just thanks, Alan.
Yeah, just one quick one, mate, because you've mentioned that you're 60 years of age now, and you went to Belgium as a 17-year-old, a come back for a couple of times, but you've actually lived 40 years of your life really in Belgium. What is it that keeps you in that place? I mean, of course, the bike, but what is the main thing that you love about Belgium?
Well, to be really honest with you, John, I think I must have had a past life here somehow. I just feel an affinity, and especially the First World War. I keep going back to Ypres all the time. I keep going to Aussie burial sites and, discovering new cemeteries and stuff like that. Somehow I've got this affinity with Belgium and Flanders and the bike racing. I don't know. It's in my blood now after all the time that I've been here. What keeps me here is the bike racing, of course. The years that I had out of cycling, I just pined to come back to Australia. That's all I wanted, to go back to Australia. But my first wife didn't want that, so I stayed. And once I got back into cycling, it doesn't matter if it's rainy or sunny or cloudy here. I don't even look at the weather because bike racing keeps me alive, and bike racing is what makes me tick. So I suppose that's the real reason that I'm here in Belgium.
Great stuff.
Well, and you touched on your battles you've had with cancer over the last few years. How's your health right now, mate?
I'm feeling pretty good, John. It's stable at the moment. They've told me they're not going to cure me. And I've dealt with that. Put that away. So I know that it's going to be management, and it could pop up and accelerate at any time. But look, I'm getting the maximum out of my life. I'm living every day to the maximum. I don't want to waste 1 minute on negativity or being sad. Of course, there's going to be moments where you're sad about different stuff, but I want to make every day count, and I think that's the most important thing. Not worried about what could come. Just living for today as much as I can. I can be around my bike riders. I can go to bike races. I can go for a ride in the rain. Be with my family, be on the phone with my mates to Australia like you guys. And that's the most important part about life is knowing you're alive and appreciating it. So that's all I'm worried about at the moment. The rest I'll deal with when it pops up.
Fantastic, mate. You're an unbelievable character in the world of cycling, but world of sport, world of lessons for life and inspiration. It's been sensational, and we had so many people after your chat at the Tour de France saying that was the best interview we've heard this year, because it's just so inspiring. And when you're telling the story about the team and you raised the champagne and said, this time last year I couldn't even walk out to watch the race, and here we are winning the Tour de France. I mean, if you can't be inspired by that, I mean, what are you doing? It's unbelievable. So we really appreciate you coming on the detour, mate, and no doubt that you're going to have plenty more success next year, and you're probably going to win Flanders. You've thrown it out there, so why not?
Great. Good idea.
Yeah.
Thanks,
guys.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for joining us. Cheers, mate. Allan Peiper, what an absolute legend, guys. That closing spiel about life and stuff doesn't get any better. And I haven't forgotten the sponsors, John.
I was just going to say.
It was so engrossing that I thought if I cut the momentum, but
I agree. No problem.
Why don't we quickly throw the sponsors? We'll do a quick wrap up, and then we can finish the show. But Iffy, open up the shoulders, Mitchell and Wines.
Thank you, Daniel. Yes, very easy to talk about Mitchell and Wines. One of Australia's favourite wineries and a place of escape. Experience the history, the beauty, and the serenity of the Goulburn Valley at your own pace. Looking over the vineyards, from the iconic tower, staying at that wonderful-looking new hotel there, relaxing by the pool, recharging in the day spa, where you can quiet the mind, unwind the body, rediscover your balance in a setting of peace and harmony. Oh, not a bad bottle of wine there either. Explore the seasonal menu at the Muse restaurant, where local produce offers worlds of flavour. Stop by the Providor and the cellars, and of course, taste their highly awarded signature wines. Always to be enjoyed. Taste the craft and care in every bottle at their cellar door. Mitchelton has become a very popular venue for weddings and to celebrate that special occasion. There's a lovely, happy couple there. And you have to go and visit the Aboriginal Art Gallery. It's a must. It's world-class with a huge range of amazing pieces from a variety of the nation's best artists. And, of course, there is the $10,000 Land Cruiser with the $2.9 million paint job.
2.9. Just keeps getting bigger and better. Here's a quick word from our great mates at Bike Exchange.
Look at this bike. You think it's just a bike, right? But it's not. It's a bike 374 people are looking at. This guy, this girl, them, all looking at it. People from here, there, and wherever this is. People that are looking for a bike. Or just a piece of it. Amateurs, semi-amateurs, and pro-amateurs. This guy wants this bike, but with this crank and these bars. This could be the perfect match. But not this one. This girl has a bike to sell, and thousands of people might purchase it. Eyes on Bikes help grow small businesses. His, hers, yours, and the latest data and insights help those businesses keep moving. We are the world's #1 bike marketplace, with over 500,000 products and 900 brands, where buyers and sellers are brought together in a place where a bike is never just a bike. Bike Exchange, where the world buys, sells, learns, and rides.
Before we wrap things up, I'll just quickly scan through a few of the comments. We had big time congrats to Allan Peiper, greetings from Slovenia. Warwick Norman says, well done to Allan, turned the tour on its head. Sandy from Telstra says, beetroot. I think he was talking about the burger. And then John Bodie said his mouth is watering. And Roger Damani says, wonderful to hear your stories, Allan, inspiring. And Sandy's backed that up again. One of life's true gentlemen, fellas. Keenan.
Well, Roger Damati, who just came on there, that is Rana Damati's dad. And I used to race with Roger. He was from Dumbork, just out the back of Leongatha, and a very classy bike rider. So there you go. Just a bit of throw that one in.
And he still won a junior world title in the time trial.
She did. Right. She certainly did. I would just like to wish all of our great listeners and followers a Merry Christmas. And thank you, Maddie, very much for coming on board again. Even though you cut me out with all your questions, every time I thought of a question, you asked it before me, so I had to go back into the box. But it's great to have you on board as always.
Yeah, go for it. Don't hold back. Just before I let you go and wrap the show up, what's your takeaway from the conversation, Keenan?
For me, it just reinforces the position that Allan holds in my life. For the people that I haven't actually had much to do with, I've only seen him on screens and read articles and done interviews like this one with him. He's had an enormous influence because of those lessons that he talks about. And there's an old saying that, often the art is better than the artist. And it's like you don't meet your heroes. But on this occasion, Allan, the person, is even better than the art that he's delivered as a sports director and as an athlete. He's an absolute gem. And every time he speaks or writes, I feel like I learned something and I'm better for the experience. He is a giant of world cycling.
Giant of hamburgers too, though. I'm still watering.
That sounded good, didn't it?
Sensational. Iffy.
Well, I thought after that Tour de France special at the finish of it when we spoke, some of the insights we got would be hard to beat. I thought today was just as good. And we had some wonderful stories. And he really opened up about his thoughts on life and people. I thought it was very, very special.
Yeah, it was such a good finish to 2020. I think, when are we going to do an episode before the year closes out?
Yes. This is our Christmas special. I think we should do that next week.
Yeah. Oh, that was our Christmas present.
That was our Christmas present. And Scotty Sunderland has agreed to come on next week, so we just need to get someone to stir him up. So I'm working on that at the moment. Yeah.
All right. Well, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Detour Pod, and on our socials so that you get a notification. So turn your notifications on, and you'll be notified when we go live next, because we don't know what we're doing tomorrow, let alone next week, in terms of dates and times. So we'll see how we go. Thanks again, Matty, for coming on the show. Sensational. Thanks again,
everyone.
Iffy.
Merry Christmas.
And Merry Christmas.
Merry
We'll see you
Christmas,
again
guys.
soon. Good on you. Cheers.